He had a lot of people who were with him in scientific meetings, had no knowledge whatsoever of anything that Epstein was doing, and they are being found guilty by association, and that's pure McCarthyism.
Let's try and establish some facts then with Alan Dershowitz, the defence lawyer who represented Jeffrey Epstein and at one time the US President Donald Trump. A warm welcome to you, Alan. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. I also represented Bill Clinton when he was president in his impeachment, so I've touched all the bases. Documents, and the new release of documents really confirms what I have been saying for a long time. Look, there are real victims. There are real young women who are 15 or 16 and who were exploited and victimized and are real survivors. But the vast majority of women who had sexual contact with Jeffrey Epstein were adults who were paid for sex, who came back over and over again and are not victims. Some of them then went out and solicited young women to give to Jeffrey Epstein for money. They were co-conspirators. There are others who never met Jeffrey Epstein, but lawyers went up to them and said, you live in Palm Beach, you're 20 years old. Why don't you say you gave Epstein a massage? We'll collect $50,000. So it's very important to distinguish real victims from non-victims.
Yeah, but there could have been coercion involved. I would just be cautious about casting aspersions on all victims in that way, Alan. We're not really here to try and slay any of the victims or cast aspersions on them. Even if they willingly solicited business, they could have been caught up in coercion. They could have been bribed. They could have been there. There could have been any number of circumstances surrounding that, and I think the most important thing here,
voluntary and completely, you're denying agency to 25-year-old women. What you're saying is 25-year-old women who went back over and over and over again for their $150 didn't have the agency. They necessarily the course.
Alan Dershowitz, I'm saying I don't know the situation and circumstances of those women. And so I don't want to cast aspersions on them. And I certainly do not want to speak on their behalf, because they are the only ones who should be speaking, or at least through those lawyers or whoever they are working with their consent. Okay, let's just take a step aside from that if we can, because there have been revelations in these files that are worth addressing. I understand the victims should not be forgotten, but there's also plenty of conversations about the fall of powerful men here and how they are involved in many of these files. What else is interesting to you when we look at what's been released? What else is of interest to you?
What's interesting to me is people are accused based on simply knowing Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein held these seminars at Harvard. He had a lot of close friends. He had a lot of people who were with him in scientific meetings, had no knowledge whatsoever of anything that Epstein was doing, and they are being found guilty by association, and that's pure McCarthyism. I lived through the original McCarthyism. People accuse, and then they're unwilling to come forward. Under the Sixth Amendment to our Constitution and under British law, you're entitled to confront your accusers. And so let's not go down a path of McCarthyism where just because a woman claims she's a victim or a survivor, she immediately gets immunity from being cross-examined or immediately gets immunity from having her background checked. Yeah, let's not cast aspersions on innocent people and victims and survivors.
Okay, but look, it does have to be recognised. And I'm absolutely sure that you will recognise that Jeffrey Epstein served 2 periods in prison for his actions. So he's certainly not without blame. You say, well, anyone associated with him was immediately sullied. And that is a fair point to make. Perhaps that is the case, that Jeffrey Epstein committed crimes. He was convicted in a court of law for those crimes. And so therefore, there are understandable questions about who else knew what was going on. And those questions have been sent in your direction, Alan Dershowitz, as well. How could you possibly not have known? Listeners will ask, people will ask upon hearing you, how could you possibly not have known what Jeffrey Epstein was up to?
because he hid from everybody what he was doing. He hid it from some of the most important people in the world. And remember, you have to distinguish between the time prior to when he made a plea bargain and admitted that he had committed crimes, and after that. After that, people knew. But most of us, I had my connections with him before any of that, and I didn't know, and nobody knew. And it's McCarthyism. Senator McCarthy was saying, how did you not know? Your wife was a member of the Communist Party. Your cousin was a member of the Communist Party. You had to know. That's what McCarthyism was. And that's what this new McCarthyism is. If you knew him, you had to know. No, prove it. Prove it. If you knew him, that means you knew about his scientific material. You knew that he was making contribution to Harvard. You didn't know what he was doing in the privacy of his bedroom when he kept it completely isolated. So
well, I think that many people would argue back that it wasn't just in Jeffrey Epstein's bedroom, and the allegations suggest that it definitely wasn't just Jeffrey Epstein who was involved with these women. Can I just dig into your knowledge here? And I'm really interested to know what you think about some of the allegations, and perhaps we can scotch some of them. Perhaps we can look at perhaps more substance behind others. One of the most explosive revelations so far involves FBI memos discussing Epstein's alleged intelligence connections. An FBI memo recently made public suggests that a confidential source believed that he was co-opted by Mossad in relation to the Epstein, or that you, were co-opted by Mossad in relation to the Epstein case. How do you explain such a specific claim appearing in federal investigative files? And what would you say to those who argue this explains the extraordinary leniency of that 2008 plea deal?
They're just dead wrong. I know who the source is. The confidential source is a complete nutcase who was not believed by the FBI. I know who he is. I know what his name is. He made up the story. Look, I represented the Mossad once. I helped get 3 Mossad agents who had been arrested in Turkey. I used my legal ability to help them. I am not a Mossad agent. Neither was Epstein. The Mossad would never hire somebody like Epstein. It's total nonsense. And if he had been a Mossad agent or a CIA agent, the first person he would have told was me to try to get him a better deal. He hated the deal he got. He refused to pay me my legal fee. He fired me. He thought I was a terrible lawyer because I ended up getting him a plea where he went to jail and he had to register as a sex offender. If he had been an intelligence source, the first person he would have sold was me, and I would have told the government, and we would have gotten a far better deal. So it's total, complete nonsense. And just because there's a source that's quoted by the FBI, an anonymous source, that's again McCarthyism. We have an anonymous source, so it must be true. Do not believe anonymous sources. That anonymous source is, and I know that he's not telling the truth.
Okay, the files reference a conversation where Alex Acosta, who served as the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida, which was allegedly told that Epstein belonged to intelligence. So here we can step away from an anonymous source and talk about a name. As a key architect, again, of that non-prosecution agreement, were you ever privy, Alan Dershowitz, to discussions regarding Epstein's status as a protected asset? Or was there any reason why Epstein may have thought he was a protected asset?
No, and Acosta denied it. He said the conversation never occurred. I never discussed anything like that with Acosta because I had no reason to believe that Epstein was an agent or a source, because he wasn't. Again, it's one of these made-up stories. I would say the vast majority of what is in these files demonstrate that the FBI just didn't believe any of this. People came forward and the FBI said, we've done an investigation. We don't believe it. If he had been a source, obviously that would have come out, and it never did, because he wasn't a source. And I never discussed it with Acosta because there was no truth to it. And Acosta denies that he was ever told that he was an agent or an intelligence. So let's understand the difference between facts and surmise, or facts and allegations.
Which is exactly why we're here today, and we appreciate you giving us your side of some of these allegations, pointing out some of these things. Look, can I just ask whether it's plausible to suggest that Ghislaine Maxwell followed in her father's footsteps and worked on behalf of Mossad or British intelligence?
Absolutely not. No, we know her father probably did. I wrote an article about her father when her father ended up dying, and
This
there
is
was
Robert Maxwell.
may have been a source. But Ghislaine Maxwell, there's no indication of that at all. Jeffrey Epstein came to visit me in Israel when I was writing a book once, and he had never been to Israel. He didn't know anybody there. He asked me to put together a lunch with 4 or 5 of the brightest people in Israel, and I did. Justices of the Supreme Court, judges, professors. He didn't know anybody. He went to he came to Tel Aviv, had lunch, and flew out that night. The idea that somehow he was connected to intelligence sources is just simply made up. There's no truth to it whatsoever.
Something I've always wanted to ask you, do you believe that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself?
Well, I don't see what the alternative theory is. I mean, I don't see how anybody could have gotten to him. But he was not suicidal, and he died on a weekend. And on that Monday and Tuesday, he was supposed to have a bail hearing, and his very excellent lawyers, I was not his lawyer at that point. I had terminated my role as his lawyer 10 years earlier. But at that point in time, his very excellent lawyers were telling him that he had a chance of getting out on bail. So he wasn't motivated to kill himself. On the other hand, the idea that he would spend the rest of his life in a rat-infested prison is not something he could tolerate. So the argument against him having committed suicide is a difficult one because you have to have an alternative theory. Who was at him? And so I think in balance, he probably committed suicide, but I can't be sure of that.
And did you know that he fathered a secret child or indeed children?
Did I know? I mean, that's a question. Did I know? Do you know that he fathered a child? I've never heard of that in my life. It's totally up.
I wasn't his personal lawyer, so I'm just asking now that all of this is out, did you have any knowledge of this?
No, of course. So don't ask me, did I know? Of course I didn't know, because it probably isn't true. Who is the child? The child would now be what? I don't know how old. Let the child come forward. Let there be evidence, not just surmise. But we're just making up these stories over and over again.
Okay. Look, a final one. Should Andrew Mountbatten Windsor give evidence to Congress? Should he testify?
If he chooses to, he should. He's not compelled to. He's a British citizen. If he has nothing to hide, he should give evidence. If he has something to hide, he shouldn't. I have never refused to answer a single question from you or anybody else because I have nothing to hide. I did absolutely nothing wrong. From the day I met Jeffrey Epstein, I've had sexual contact with one woman, my wife, period. So I did nothing wrong. So I have no problem answering every question in the world. If people don't want to answer questions, maybe they want to protect their privacy. Or they did something wrong. I don't know the answer to that question. That's up to him. If I'm called in front of Congress, I'll testify immediately. I'll tell the whole story under oath, and I will not hold anything back.
And that has been the whole story that you've been telling us. There is nothing else for you to reveal.
Well, they can ask me any questions. I'm happy to answer any questions. There are specific questions I can answer, and I'd be happy to do it. I want the whole truth to come out. The alleged victims are complaining too much has come out, and then they're complaining too little has come out. And the only point that's very important is that under American and British law, if somebody accuses somebody else of something very serious, they have to be willing to be made public and be subject to examination, investigation, and treated with the presumption of innocence that cloaks everybody in both of our countries.